I'm going to start this morning with a little audience participation. How many of you have lived in the Charlottesville area? Raise your hands if you have lived in the Charlottesville area, and I'm going to include Albemarle, Fluvanna, Madison, Green, everywhere in this area. How many of you have lived in this area outside of maybe college or a stint in the military pretty much all your life? Wow. That blows me away. How many of you have lived in different cities, or I'll say areas, because a couple of the places I lived, there was no city anywhere near it, but it was a whole different area. How many of you lived in at least 5 different cities or areas in your life? Okay, a few. How many of you have lived in 10 or more different cities or areas in your life? Okay. 15? Am I it? Even the military family hadn't gone to 15. 15 different areas I've lived in my life. Now, and that's over the course of about 6 states. Now, for those of you who have moved around, how many of you have ever moved where you packed up the moving van and you got in and you started off down the road having no idea where you were moving to? Now, I don't mean you didn't know much about the area, like if, they've got nice parks or a good place for Chinese food or whatever. No, I mean, got in the van, started heading off, and didn't know where you were going to stop. But that's what happened to the man we're going to look at today. That's what God asked of a man named Abram. And that's what we're going to look at today. If you have your Bibles, turn to Genesis chapter 12. Very first book in the Bible, Genesis chapter 12. And we're going to look at this great adventure God led him on and what we can learn from that about the adventure he has for our life today. And while you're turning to Genesis 12, let me give you just a little bit of background on this man, Abram. And I'll just warn you, I may go back and forth between calling him Abram or Abraham because God changed his name at one point, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he lived about 4,000 years ago, about 2,100 years before the birth of Christ, and he lived in a city called Ur. Now, I have a map, and Ur is in the bottom right corner there. It's in what is southeastern modern-day Iraq. Right? Just to get you an idea of modern day times. He lived in a city called Ur. Ur was a pretty progressive place scientifically. They had their own version of central heat and indoor plumbing. That's pretty impressive for 4,000 years ago, isn't it? Ur was a happening place, and this is where Abraham and his family lived. And we're not told a whole lot about his family, but we are told that his father worshiped pagan gods. His father worshiped idols. And so he was not someone who was committed to God and committed to serving God. That's the environment he grew up in. So religiously, heathen, culturally, pretty sophisticated, and very close to his family. One of the things that you learn about Abram, he's a very, very loyal fellow because he looked after his father. He looked after his nephew. When his brother died, his brother had a son named Lot, and he would look after Lot for his brother. And he was very loyal to his wife. His wife, Sarai, was barren. She could not have any children. And in that day and time, that was reason enough. You could divorce, you could put your wife away for that because it was so important to have heirs to pass things on to that you could divorce a woman for that. And yet, Abram didn't do that, even though he had no children. And this is the man God decides to speak to and to call to a great adventure. He says this, Genesis chapter 12, starting with verse 1. So the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you." Now, we talked about moving. Think about what God is asking Abram here. Leave your country, your hometown, this wonderful city you live in. It's got all of the perks and all the things you want. Leave that behind. Leave your extended family behind. This was a culture where your extended family, that was your rock, that was your life. The society was built on the family unit and the extended family. And he said, leave all that behind and start heading out. I'm not going to tell you where yet. I'll let you know when I feel the time is right. Imagine what that would be like. Imagine God contacted you and said, hey, once you put the house on the market, load up the U-Haul, and start heading west on 64, I'll let you know. I just picture that if it were me, that old comedy routine. You know, Stan. Yeah, who's that? It's the Lord. Right. Stan, I want you to fill the van and head out. I want you to move. Where do you want me to move to? I'll let you know. Right. Lindsay, is that you? That's got to be you. You're always trying to pull something. That's got to be back behind that. No, that'd be the attitude I have. Are you kidding me? Just leave everything behind and not even know where it is you want me to go? But that's what he asked of Abram. That's what he asked. But he didn't just ask him to do this. He made some promises. Look at the promises he made him. He said, if you do this, I'm going to make you into a great nation. I'm going to make your name great. All the people of the world are going to be blessed through you. Now that's a promise, especially when you consider that Abram wasn't an 18-year-old kid. He wasn't a young man in his early 20s full of youthful energy and exuberance. He was in his 70s when God called him to do this. You got to admire a man who's willing to start out on a great adventure in his 8th decade on this planet. And then when you consider the fact that God promised him, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, and he didn't even have any children. He's in his 70s. His wife is long past childbearing years. And God has promised him, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to do great things through you. And given those promises, what did Abram do? What would you do? You might look back and go, oh, of course I went. God called, I would go. I'm not so sure. But look at what Abram did. Genesis 11, verse 4. Or 12, verse 4. It says, verse 4. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. God said, will you go on this adventure that I've got for you? Will you set out trusting me that I will lead you to where I want you to go? He said, I'm all in. Will you trust my promise that I will make a great nation out of you, even though you're 75 years old and you don't have any kids and your wife's been barren? He said, okay, I'll do it. I want to know where Abram got this kind of faith. I mean, here's a guy who grew up in a pagan household. That's one of my many questions I have on my list I've mentioned for when I get to heaven. Where did Abram get this kind of faith that God could ask this? And he said, all right, I'm in. You just tell me when to stop. But that's what he did. And so he set out. I have a map here that's where he set out from the city of Ur, which, as we saw before, is in the bottom right corner. He sets out from Ur, and he doesn't go straight across because that's nothing but desert. And so he goes up the Euphrates River, and he goes to a town called Haran, stops there for a little bit, and then comes back down through Canaan. And he's actually going to go as far as Egypt to the city of Tanis, which, as we all know, is where Indiana Jones found the lost ark in the Well of Souls and got stranded there, went by the Nazis and stuck with all those snakes, right? Okay, that didn't happen, all right? If somebody's going to go home, and the preacher said that Raiders of the Lost Ark was from the Bible. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. All right, that part didn't happen. But there really is a city of Tanis, and Abram went there before he ventured back toward Canaan where God had called him. And he made that long trip. It's about 1,300 miles. Abram traveled, and he didn't have a car. He didn't have a U-Haul. But he traveled that long. And in fact, When God said, go, he didn't just go. The story says in Hebrews 11:8, it says this: by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance, and he left not knowing where he was going. And in the original language where it says, by faith Abraham, when he was called, obeyed, the tense of that verse there is one where the literal translation of that verse would be, while being called, Abram obeyed. While being called. In other words, God didn't even get the offer out of his mouth, and Abram's already packing. God, wherever you send me, that's where I'm going to go. That's how eager he was to go and do what God had him to do. You say, well, why didn't God tell him where he was going? I mean, was that so hard? God knew where he was going to send him. Why didn't he tell him? Well, the point is, God wanted Abram to recognize that his security did not lie in his family or his possessions. The two things he probably had put the most stock in for his life and his security in life. He said, I want to make sure you know that your security doesn't lie in your family or your possessions, but in me. It lies in God. And so he asked him, take your hands off the wheel, let me steer. That's faith. Because see, it's one thing to go when you're told where you're going, but it's a whole different thing to go when you don't even know where it is that you're going. I wonder if he bugged him every once in a while, like your kids do in the back seat when you're on a long trip. Every couple of days, Abram's saying, are we there yet? How much farther? And I wonder if God did what all the rest of us parents do. What do you say when your kids say, how much farther? 20 minutes. It doesn't matter if you got 500 miles left to go. How much farther? 20 minutes. 20 minutes. But he went. He was willing to exchange the known for the unknown. Now that's scary, folks. Exchanging the known for the unknown is a scary thing. My family moved 11 times by the time I started college. I was the new kid in school 8 times in my 13 years of school. And I'm an introvert. I started out with new schools in kindergarten. I moved in the middle of kindergarten and had to be the new kid twice in kindergarten. Exchanging the known for the unknown is scary. But that's where the adventure is. That's where the excitement is. And I believe God is calling some of us in this room today to a move like Abram's. Maybe not a physical move to a new physical location, but God is speaking to us today through a man named Abram. And he's saying, as surely as I called Abram to go to a place where I would tell him where he's going, I am calling you. I have a place for you. I have an appointment for you to keep. I have a direction for your life that's different from what you've even seen yet. If you'll just learn to trust me the way that Abram did. And Abram did. He trusted him. And God fulfilled his promises. Abram would eventually have a son called Isaac. He was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Can you imagine chasing after a toddler at 100 years old? My brother's grandkids come over for one night. It takes me a week to recover from it, and I'm half that age. But God fulfilled his promise. Now, Abram didn't get to see the fulfillment of all of those promises while he was here in his life on this earth, but he had a great view to see what God would do. There's a lot of sports fans in our congregation. How many of you have ever sat in a skybox for a game? Ever sat in a skybox for a game? It's great, isn't it? It is the best seat. You get to see everything perfectly. It's wonderful. My daughter and I are hockey fans. We got to go to a hockey game a few years ago, and a nice person who gave us tickets to a skybox. Now, at a hockey game, they call it a suite, but it's the skybox, man. It's great. We had the best view of the game. There's a kitchen and a refrigerator in there. You can get snacks and drinks. You don't have to stand in line at a concession stand. Don't have to pay extra. There's even a private bathroom there. You don't have to mingle with everybody else. The skybox is great, but the best part about it is you get the best view of the game in the skybox. Well, Abram didn't see the fulfillment of all of God's promises during his life here on this earth, but he had a skybox view to see it play out. He had a skybox view as God worked in his great-grandson Joseph's life and raised him to be second in charge of all of Egypt. And he had a skybox view as that great-grandson saved the rest of his family when a famine hit. And he brought them to Egypt, and he had provided food. He had a skybox view as that great-grandson and his brothers became a mighty nation while they were in Egypt. He had a skybox view as Moses came at God's direction and led them out of Egypt through the sea on dry land. He had a skybox view for Joshua, leading them into the land that he had promised Abram centuries earlier. He had the best seat in the house to see God fulfill his promises because he was willing to say, okay, God, wherever you lead, I'm willing to go. God is doing some great work here. And not all of us will see every bit of what God does, but if we have the right attitude and we have that God, wherever you lead, I'll go, whatever you ask, I'll do mindset, we'll have skybox view to see what God does beyond our years here. The people who started this congregation almost 70 years ago, most of them haven't been able to see everything God has done even this far, let alone down the road. But they have a skybox view to see what he's going to do. And they're cheering us on and they're saying, keep going, don't stop, don't even slow down, don't let anything stop you from going where God leads you. Listen to what it says in Hebrews chapter 12. In Hebrews chapter 11, God goes through kind of the faith hall of fame, a list of all these people who showed tremendous faith in him, including Abram. And he goes through and he details that, and then he says, a lot of these people didn't live to see God's promises in this lifetime. But look at what it says in the first verse of chapter 12. The Living Bible puts it this way. It says, since we have such a great crowd of men of faith watching us from the grandstands or the skybox, let us strip off everything that slows us down or holds us back, and especially those sins that wrap themselves so tightly around our feet and trip us up. And let us run with patience the particular race that God has set before us. He says they're looking down and they're cheering us on and they're saying, don't stop. Don't let anything slow you down. When God leads, you just follow. Don't worry about where. Let him take care of it because it's the great adventure and you want to be a part of it. Don't you want to be a part of that? That was kind of pathetic. Don't you want to be a part of that? All right, that's a little better. Folks, there are a couple of things that can prevent us from seeing those things happen. One is a fear of change. I know, the dreaded C word. Nobody likes the C word. But you know something? You can't go anywhere without having something change. You can't go anywhere unless something changes. And I know the idea of any kind of change, it kind of instills fear in us. But folks, that's where the adventure is. That's where the excitement is. That's where we find fulfillment in life and joy. That's what gives us, it's that mentality that says, I'm going to follow you, Lord, whatever you ask. That's what gives us purpose, gives us a reason for getting out of bed. But fear, especially fear of change, can stop us. Folks, we're here today in this building because of a group of people who almost 70 years ago were worshiping at First Christian Church. And God called them and said, you know, I want to plant a new church in the Fry Spring area of Charlottesville. Will you go with me? Will you do it? And they didn't let fear of change stop them. They did it, even though it meant a radical change to their life. They didn't say, well, you know, I've been going to First Christian all my life. It's the only church I know. I like the way things are here. I don't want to change and be part of that. Or, you know, our worship here is so amazing. We've got this incredible organ with these giant pipes. Nothing makes a sound like this incredible pipe organ we have. There's no place else we could go that would sound as good as that. I don't want to be a part of that. No, they said, God, you're leading and I want to follow. I don't know what it's going to be like, but I want to be a part of the great adventure. And he didn't take them thousands of miles away the way he did with Abram. He took them about 1.5 miles. But it was a new adventure. It was something completely new and something completely different. And they gave themselves wholeheartedly to that because that's what God called them to do. And when they couldn't pack any more people inside that little chapel that they built, just a few years later, God called them to build something bigger. He said, hey, I'm working here and there are people coming and we don't want the shoe to tell the foot how big it can grow. I want you to build something bigger. And they didn't say, well, we just built this a few years ago. I mean, I kind of like it over here. It's intimate. I know we're packed in like with a shoehorn, but it's intimate. I get to see everybody. I don't know. You build a bigger building that people can spread out. People aren't as close, and I don't want to be a part of that. I have my seat here in the chapel. Might not have my seat if we go to a bigger room. Things are going to be different. In here, it's small enough. We don't need microphones and a sound system. I can hear them just as well. We go to a bigger room, we're going to have microphones and sound system. I don't think I want to mess with that. What are we going to do with these pews? I paid for these pews. And it wasn't that long ago. What are we going to do with this room? Is it just going to sit here? I don't want to do that. We got this here. Let's make it work. No, they said, God's leading us. We want to make sure that we don't miss out on what God's doing. And so if he leads us to do this, this is what we're going to do. Our family members who came over here from all points. Think about what this was like. Those of you who have been at Cherry Avenue, think about what this was like for them. The change that God asked of them. I want you to close down this church that's been going and doing great things. I want you to shut down. I want you to come and be a part of this congregation over here. Think about what that's like. Think about what that was like for them. And they didn't say, well, I like it over here. I mean, I know everybody here. I don't know everybody at Cherry Avenue. I don't want to be a part of that. Or, I know where everything is in this building. That building over there is like a maze. I might get lost in that building and never be heard from again. I like our worship here. I like the way we worship. They probably worship differently from the way we do. I don't know if I want to change and do something different. I don't want to do that. I sweated in this building. I ran electrical cable. I painted. I donated money for this. And we get this building and it looks great. And now you want us to just drop it and go somewhere else? Man, I don't want to leave this behind. I like listening to Lindsay preach. I don't want to get used to having to hear someone else once in a while. I mean, come on. You might not have the cool stories Lindsay tells. And he doesn't. But they said, Lord, this is where you're leading. I don't understand it. I don't know where it's leading. But if this is where you say to go, this is what I'm going to do. Because they had that mindset. They said, Lord, whatever you ask, wherever you lead, we want to follow because we want to be part of the great adventure. And we need to have that same type of mindset that says, God, wherever you lead, we're willing to go, even if it means that some things change. The other thing that stops us is getting comfortable. Getting comfortable. Abram's father went part way, and then they got to Haran, and Abram's father, they stopped for a little bit, and Abram's father said, no, I'm good here. And he didn't go any farther. That's where he died. And he never got to see the promise fulfilled. He never got to see the land that God was leading Abram to. And it's so easy to fall in that mindset where you get comfortable. In a lot of the places we moved, when my dad came and said, we're going to move away from here, there were times when I was just like Abram. I had my bags packed before he could finish getting it out of his mouth. But there were a couple, one in particular, where I fought tooth and nail because I was happy. I was comfortable there. And boy, looking back, I'm so glad that I didn't have control over that situation because I see the path that I was on there and the path that God put me on when we moved to this new place. And I honestly don't believe I would even be in ministry if we had stayed where we were at that time. And it's so easy to fall into that mindset where we get comfortable. It's so easy to get to where comfort becomes our biggest concern. And it's such a danger, because when we get comfortable, that's when we tend to start turning a deaf ear toward God when he calls us to do something. But it's that mindset that says, God, I'm willing to do whatever you call me to do. That's where the adventure is. That's where the excitement is. That's where the joy is. That's what allows us to get to the end of our life and look back and say, you know what? I squeezed everything I could out of the life God gave me because I was willing to say yes when God said, I want you to go here. I was willing to say yes to that. Now, COVID hurt us as a church. It hurt every church. But you know what? God has been faithful. And over this last year especially, we've seen new people come to Christ. New people become part of our congregation. And we've seen that excitement as God is working. And we haven't built specific new buildings, but we've revamped, we've renovated part of our building. And it's created excitement. We had all the parents we had last week for the children's open house. It was terrific, the excitement that's there. And again, we haven't built new buildings, but we've updated a lot of the infrastructure that we need so that we're ready wherever and however God calls us. And we don't have details on that. God hasn't revealed details on that, but as leaders, we're praying that God will show us where he wants us to go. Meanwhile, we've set out. We're going to start down the road, and God, you just show us where it is you want us to go. Don't you want to be a part of that? Don't you want to feel that excitement that comes with saying, okay, Lord, I don't know where you're leading, but I'm in. I'm all in. I want to be part of that. Because that's where the excitement is. That's where the adventure is. But it all starts right here and right here. With a mindset that says, okay, God, I don't understand it. I'm not even sure I like it. But you're calling. And so my answer is yes. When I was growing up, there was a rock singer by the name of Meatloaf. Weird name for a rock singer. But at some point, he released a song that always had me scratching my head. And this was the name of the song. It was, I will do anything for love, but I won't do that. And every time I'd hear that, I think we have different definitions of the word anything, right? It's like you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. I thought that makes no sense. Who would ever say such a thing? And then I remembered, well, you know what? There are times I've told God, I'd do anything for you. I mean, except for this, I won't do that. God, I'll do anything you want. Okay, I want you to go to Bible college. Okay, Lord, I'll do anything for you, but I won't do that. And I spent 4 years getting a history degree at JMU before I finally gave in and said, okay, Lord, anything means anything. And you want to know why I fought that so hard? It's because I was afraid if I gave everything over to God, he was going to call me to the jungles of Africa. And I didn't want to go to the jungles of Africa. I didn't want that. You have to eat vegetables in the jungles of Africa. I didn't want that. But finally I got to the point where, okay, anything is anything. You know what? He hadn't called me to the jungles of Africa, at least not yet. I've been to the jungles of the Philippines and I survived. In fact, it was the adventure of a lifetime. And I love telling stories about that because it impacted me so much. Each one of us has 3 questions we have to answer. And we'll close with this. 3 questions we have to answer. First one is, what is God calling me to? Because God is calling every one of us in this room to something, some next step. Maybe for you, it's keep searching me out. You've started coming. You've started learning a little bit about me. Keep searching. Keep coming. Get involved in something where you learn more about me. Maybe for some of you, God's calling you. You've done that and you've gotten to know him. And maybe he's calling you to take a step across the line and say, okay, Lord, I'm giving you control of my life. I'm taking my hands off the wheel. You've got it. You're in control. And be baptized into him and begin that great adventure Maybe for some of you, he's calling you and saying, you know what? I want you to stop just going through the motions of your faith. I want you to get serious about being a fully devoted follower of Christ. Maybe for some of you, he's calling you and saying, you know, I'm ready for you to get off the sidelines. I'm ready for you to get off the bench and get in the game and find a place to serve and be committed to serving me in a way you never have before, because it'll be the adventure of a lifetime. Maybe he's calling you to take care of a habit or an addiction, or maybe a personal trait that's spiritual that's not what it ought to be. And you know you need to take care of this, and he's calling you and saying, I want you to get serious about this. Maybe he's calling you to finally have that conversation with that neighbor or that coworker or that family member who doesn't know Christ, and say it's time to start talking to them about that. What is God calling you to do that you have a tendency to say, okay, Lord, I'd do anything for you, but I won't do that? And the next question you got to answer is, what is it that's holding me back? What is it that's holding me back? What is it that has me saying, okay, Lord, I do anything for you, but I won't do that? How about for us as a congregation? Do we have the mentality that says, okay, Lord, wherever you lead, whatever you ask of us, we're there. No matter what, we're there. Or do we have a mentality that says, Lord, I'll do anything for you, but I won't do that? And before you get nervous, I'm not thinking of anything in particular. God hasn't laid down anything in particular. But what if he had? What if he does? What if he says, I have somewhere to lead you, and it's going to be new, and it's going to be different from anything you've ever done before? What's our attitude going to be? God, I'll do anything for you, but I won't do that. God, I'll do anything for you, but don't ask me to change the way things look. I like the way things look. I don't want things to be different in that. God, I'll do anything for you. But, you know, that artwork with the plastic fruit, somebody donated that. And, I mean, we can't do anything with that. I mean, it's got a little nameplate on it with their name engraved on it. That means it's got to be here until Jesus comes back, right? We can't do anything with that. God, I'll do anything for you, but you know, we've done this way for decades. And let me tell you, it worked in the 70s, I'm telling you. And if the world would just get back to the way it was then, it would work now. What's our mentality going to be? Is it, God, wherever you lead, I'm willing to go? Or are we going to say, yeah, Lord, I'll do anything for you, but I mean, not that. What's the attitude that we're going to have? Charles Wesley said something that I thought was pretty striking. He's the English preacher, and he said, give me 100 men who hate nothing but sin and love God with all their hearts, and I will turn the United Kingdom upside down for Jesus Christ. Now, we have about 150 who make their way through this building every week. Don't you think God might turn this city upside down for Jesus Christ? If we just have the attitude that says, okay, Lord, wherever you lead, whatever you ask, I'm in. I don't need to know the details. If you ask it, the answer is yes. Don't you want to be a part of that? Don't you want to have that attitude and be on that great adventure where you say, man, God was asking to do this and I didn't know where in the world this was going to go, but it's been incredible. I love Abram's story. Remember when I said that God changed Abram's name? It's just one of the little tiny things, but this is the way God works. He said, I'm going to change your name. And he changed it from Abram to Abraham. And you look at that and you go, well, that's not much of a change. Why did he even bother? Well, here's why he bothered. Because the name Abram means exalted father. The name Abraham means father of many. And so every time Abraham was called by name, he was reminded of God's promise. Hey, I told you, I'm going to make you into a great nation. It's just that little reminder. Keep going where I lead you. Keep pushing ahead. And I love Abram's story because it's not just Abram's story, it's all of our story. Look at the disciples. Peter, Andrew, James, and John were fishing. Jesus comes along and he says, follow me. I'll make you fishers of men. I don't think they even understood what that meant. But they followed him. Matthew was sitting in his tax collector booth with a lucrative job, making a lot of money. Jesus comes by and he looked at him and he said, follow me. And Matthew got up, dropped everything, and followed Jesus. They didn't know where it was going to lead. In fact, if they had an idea about it, they were wrong as to where it was going to lead them. But they knew one thing. They knew Jesus was the right one to follow. And so they dropped everything and they said, okay, I'll follow you wherever you lead. And folks, that's our story too. That's what he asks of us, to follow me. Russell Moore puts it pretty bluntly. He says this, for too long we've said to people, invite Jesus into your life. But here's the news flash, he says. Jesus doesn't want to be in your life because your life's a wreck. My life's a wreck. He wants to call us out of our life into his life. He wants to take us boldly where we've never gone before, into the life of the kingdom of God. He wants to take us on the great adventure. But it's up to us. How will we answer when he calls? We say, okay, Lord, I'd do anything for you, but I won't do that. Or will we say, as Abram said, all right, Lord, wherever you lead, that's where I'm going to go. I will go wherever you want me to go. And folks, if that's our attitude, if we have the mindset that says, okay, God, I trust you completely. I'll go where you want me to go. Then imagine the possibilities.